Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure this time to introduce the guest. And Sid, it's okay if I start, right? Because you told me to introduce Saket. Just checking because you normally do the introductions. Started and then, okay, I'm just going to continue. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Saket Pande from the civil and environmental engineering. No, he's from TU Delft and sorry. He's from TU Delft and he's here with us today to talk to us about his work. I'm going to give you a brief background of about Dr. Pande, and he has actually been to Amrita, so he's familiar with Amrita. So I'm not going to introduce Amrita or our work, and he's familiar with our work too. I'm going to tell the rest of the group, I think most of you have not had a chance to meet Dr. Pande when he was here. I think it was in December last year, and but I'm going to introduce him so the rest of you can have an idea about him and his background. Dr. Pande did his bachelor's in technology from IIT Delhi, and he did this in the civil and environmental engineering, and then he did his PhD also in civil engineering, this time from the United States. He is basically, his current research is, he's a hydrologist and a water economist. And these are, I think, two topics that are very dear to AMMACHI Labs and the work that we do. So I'm sure that plenty of you would be interested in what he has to talk. And I hope you will ask him a lot of questions. Some of you may have already heard his talk during the sustainability conference that the WNA folks had organized earlier. His project experience includes assessment of the impact of climate change on agriculture and health. And he did this work in Benin. For those of you who don't know where Benin is, it's a small country in Africa. And he also worked on the anthropogenic influence of grazing, that is on land degradation and water resource availability in Ethiopia, and the assimilation and harmonization of data sets from a variety of sources and scales using a software that he has developed, co-developed. And at Delft University, he is involved with the 2030 SDG agenda for the United Nations, and his special areas that he's working in is coupled human water systems, such as the adoption of household water treatment systems, link between population growth and water scarcity, and behavior of smallholder farming in India, valuation of water in Indian and Lebanese basins, global recovery of wastewater from agriculture, and coupled system modeling of rural-urban migration in China, in a province in China. I won't attempt to pronounce the name of the province. And Saket has been very involved with sociohydrology and has worked, I don't know how to say this. Is this Panta Rhei? How do you, Panta Rhei? I'm not quite sure how you pronounce this. So he's
Panta Rhei, yeah.
Panta Rhei, okay, and in the coupled human water systems, and he's currently leading the TU Delft collaboration to a major water conservation project on smallholder sustainability in India. I think he's also working very closely with Dr. Manisha's team and the Jeevamritam project on this. He is the associate editor for the Journal of Hydrology, Hydrological Sciences, and the Journal Hydrological Sciences Journal, and the Frontiers in Water, Frontiers Journal in Water. And this is the introduction. And today, Dr. Saket is going to talk to us about the RNES methodology that we had a brief conversation about. And in our discussions, we realized that this is something that would be very interesting for the entire group to look at, both the people who are working on the ASAM framework, but also the people who are working on water particularly. And I felt that this would be it would be very good capacity building for us. So I requested if he could talk to the entire lab so that we could learn from what he has to offer us. And with that, over to you, Saket.
Thank you.
is so close. It's so close to our heart, and so I'm sure that we will all really enjoy listening to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Bhavani Rao, thank you for a very nice introduction. I really appreciate this opportunity as well to present some of our work, in particular trying to really learn from AMMACHI Labs work and how both the works can be synced together and develop new understanding, so to say. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to share my screen. I believe you're able to see this now. So I changed the title of my presentation a bit because it was anyway too long. It's more about changing human behavior, and the idea being by empowering women or folks in general through digital innovation in water and sanitation can bring about certain changes in how we use water, and certain changes in behavior itself, or let's say digital innovation in water and sanitation may in itself engender changes in human behavior, use of toilets, for example, and may empower women. I'm not going to talk about I'm not going to talk about how it can be done. That it has already been done. I'm not going to discuss that, but perhaps a methodology that we can use to understand how human behavior may change through when digital innovation is brought about in water and sanitation sector. So as already been said, I'm from TU Delft, from the water management department, and the slides that I would be presenting also includes work from D. Daniel, Luke Reithwell, Diana, Tico, Nathan, and Jules Van Leer. So we'll quickly, let's jump into what we're going to talk about broadly, at least the motivation. And this is something that I obtained, snatched it from your website. It's about empowering women through education in water, sanitation, and sustainability. And it's a really nice illustration of how various aspects of, shall I say, empowerment comes in, elements of empowerment comes in, that perhaps could be triggered by various points that have been raised here. For example, awareness, which may be in terms of learning about the risk that you're exposed to, training how to use technology, for example. Implementation is more linked to capacity building, whether you're able to sustain the intervention. For example, toilets that have been developed or constructed, whether you're able to maintain it. Through that, whether there's a community being developed that has certain attitude towards use of technologies or towards use of interventions such as community-based toilet construction. And interestingly, we also are talking about behavioral change here, which is very important. And that is the motivation behind this talk. And you would see that here, as an inspiration, everything is together. In the presentation, what we are going to do is try to disentangle behavioral change from all the other elements such as awareness, training, implementation, community development, etc., at a higher level. So we want to learn from AMMACHI Labs approach. Why? It's because of its extensive experience. The penetration that AMMACHI Labs efforts have, and that in itself is a huge learning ground for us to understand and learn from the success or not so successful implementations. And here we are talking about, well, we can take an example, for example, a community-based toilet construction, or enabling women to come together and construct toilets. And how perhaps it is linked to use of better water and sanitation practices. So given the topic, we could identify keywords, 4 keywords, and I've tried to put them in a certain order for a reason, because I see digital innovation as an intervention with the hope that it brings about certain change in human behavior, be it in terms of better sanitation practices, or depending on the context, being able to use a more advanced technology. And what does it mean in terms of water and sanitation outcomes? And in turn, what does it mean for empowerment in general, women empowerment in particular? Now, that is the last thing that I know anything about. So I'll leave it to the last, perhaps something that we could discuss around. Because it's a topic which is very new to me, quite interesting. And AMMACHI Labs, I think, given the constructive discussions that we have in the past, has already gained some traction, gained some insights in how we could understand women empowerment. So here, if we talk about, if I can go slide back, we're talking about human behavior. Let's say changing human behavior implies we have to understand human behavior and what influences human behavior. And the best example, the most, let's say, thought through example is of environmental behavior. Here we are talking about pro-environmental activism or non-activism. And there's already been quite some work done. And here what I'm presenting is a particular theory that has been used. Now, the role of theory being to interpret certain prevalent environmental behavior. And this theory that I'm showing here is VBN, so-called VBN theory, which incorporates another theory within it, a new environmental paradigm. Now, again, I'm not an expert in sociological theories. I'm more at the use end of it, but still, it's important to discuss where I'm going towards. And what VBN theory tells us, values, beliefs, and norms, which could be encapsulated in broadly culture, is that culture, through its ingredients of values, beliefs, and norms, significantly influences behavior. And if we can go further, within culture, we have set of values of individuals in a society that does not change as much. It gradually changes over time. It changes over generations, perhaps. And here, for example, values could be linked to biospherical values, egoistic values, or altruistic values, thinking about caring about the environment or caring about others. And that influences our beliefs. It could be in terms of actions that others or you are taking, and what it means to things, environmental aspects that you value. And that also influences within belief itself, to what extent can you, let's say, reduce or minimize environmental, negative environmental externalities, the environmental threats. And that set of beliefs then influences sense of obligation in the sense of how one should behave, what is normal. And that then supposedly, according to VBN, influences our behavior, how we act, how we take actions with respect to environmental protection. And there could be a feedback from behavior, as you can see my cursor, going back to beliefs. As you witness more environmental degradation, it may change your set of beliefs, and that may loop back to changing behavior. And so over time, one may see a society being, let's say, environmentally neutral to environmentally being more active, taking actions to conserve environment. And that is the idea of feedback. Now, the point here is that indeed culture is important, values, beliefs, and norms are important, but the jump to behavior is really quick. There is still some gap, something that happens between values, beliefs, and norms and behavior. And this is where so-called psychology, environmental psychology, or let's say here shown as environmental factors come in. Because where values, beliefs, and norms are shown here, if we look into more detail before it influences our behavior, actually it's influencing certain psychological triggers that then influence behavior-linked outcomes. And these include risk factor, how you perceive the threat, how you perceive risk of the poor water quality or poor sanitation. Attitude is another important factor, which is linked to how you feel about an intervention. Similarly, we have norms, what is normal. It's more closely linked to what is right or wrong, and it's not just personal, but it's also what others think and social pressure linked factors. Then other critical aspects, let's say psychological aspects or psychosocial aspects, are ability, the capacity to be able to engage with the intervention, to be able to use the intervention. And then there's self-regulation, whether you're able to sustain the use of it. And all of these things, when you disentangle, and can help us in various forms understand here, for example, boiling water as an intervention in drinking water sector. And these could be, let's say, made more tangible in the sense, norm could be what others think about boiling, so perhaps then I should boil. Attitude could be, yeah, I mean, it's positive attitude, boiling is safe. And if boiling is easy, then ability threshold is low, and that then influences and leads to good behavior in terms of boiling water and adopting that technology, simple technology, which here is household water treatment technology. So what we're getting towards is more detailed, let's say, interpretation of behavior here in context of drinking water. And what we're talking about here is household water treatment. Again, the same figures. Of course, we as individuals are embedded in certain contexts. So these factors on top that you see are so-called socio-environmental factors or contextual factors, socioeconomic factors that could be thought of as influencing either together with the psychosocial behavioral factors or in a sequential manner. And these then in turn could be thought of as influencing our behavior here shown in terms of household water treatment, boiling water as an intervention. And the implication of that intervention, whether it changes communities' behavior, more and more people start to boil water, would have positive impact on health. And therefore, it could help us understand what things should be changed, how intervention should be brought in, and this would get clearer as we move forward by what I mean when I mean how should various triggers or how should various interventions be designed that trigger the right kind of psychosocial factors that in turn leads to desired behavioral change. Now, as you can already see, this provides us with a template, so to say, being an engineer and, well, economist, but being quantitative scientist, it gives us, I am more comfortable in seeing this as a template of unraveling behaviors that we observe. And how do we do that is we can have various questions, design questions, standard questions that we can use, even though they can be adapted for different outcome variables, drinking water, is it water use efficiency, whether you're using irrigation properly or not. But then we can design questions based on this theory that provides us with a template and go out in the field and really inquire from people and disentangle their behavior in terms of these psychosocial and contextual factors. And a typical question, which now I'm talking about risk, attitude, norms, ability, and self-regulation, the RANAS framework to assess behavior, human behavior in context of water and sanitation, allows us therefore to have a standard survey questionnaire that we can go out in the field. And this is one example set of questions that we can come up with for drinking water. Risk, it's generally linked to perception. So one could ask questions such as, what are the causes of diarrheal diseases? How high do you feel the risk that you will get diarrhea? If you drink untreated water, it's about perception of how safe water is. And that question tries to hit on that. Attitude could be how you feel about using a technology here, treating water simply. And that perhaps you can think of asking, how much do you like the taste of treated water? So it's touching on the attitude towards boiling water. For example, as a way of treating. Norms could be more about descriptive, how many neighbors of yours are treating water in this, in order to inquire how normal or abnormal do you feel using household water treatment or treating water at home. We can have other questions for ability and self-regulation, such as how important is it for you to treat water, whether you have capacity enough, how much do you have to pay attention to the resources that you need to treat water, etc. So as you can already see, the kind of questions that we have here are in one way or the other mapping to this fantastic model for community development through skill development that we began with. Why is because it mentions awareness. Awareness is linked to risk here. Training is more linked to ability, self-regulation. Implementation, again, is more linked to self-regulation, maintenance, ability, community development, perhaps attitude and norms. And behavioral change, then Rana sees as something like an outcome of these aspects, other aspects shown here, the Rana's aspects. So where we have arrived at is, I think, it's perception of risk, just to answer Zur's question. So, this is where we are getting at is this methodology that perhaps could be used to interrogate people's behavior in context of water and sanitation. Could also be in context of women empowerment, which we would come towards the end. How could be in terms of whether they are using the toilets that they have built, and that use of toilets that are being built is linked to women empowerment, one dimension of women empowerment. Okay, so let's move on to some applications that this is a way to do it, and this is generic survey that we can come up with, and we have applied this in one form or the other, and so I'll show you 3 applications. The first one in more detail would be household water treatment case study that we have done in multiple locations, but here it's Indonesia, household water treatment. Particular province, it's East Sumba in Indonesia. And let's see. Okay, yeah. And then the target location where we went is one of the poorest regions. It has indigenous belief, and you can see here the access to improved water source is high, but not that high. And it has also some accessibility challenges. So the way we go about it is how do we implement the survey? So we have a standard template questionnaire based on RANAs that we can use to, we can go out in the field and really interrogate. So these could be actually the villages or regions where AMMACHI Labs is active, and other regions where AMMACHI Lab would like to go to. And what we did in case of Indonesia is a way of doing surveys. So it was a cross-sectional study. We were able to do 377 household interviews, and we were actually asking primary caregiver, essentially mothers, women, about the use of household water treatment and the various other questions to understand and interpret what triggers them to use household water treatment. So yeah, this is a standard way of doing it. We selected 4 sub-districts, and then within that 9 villages, and within each village 4 to 5 sub-villages, and then we randomly picked a house and executed a survey. And also we had not just semi-structured interviews, but we also looked at other aspects. We also had a focus group discussion to really understand a possible causal relationship, which would get clearer as we move forward. And essentially what broadly we were looking at, so our survey, various questions were hitting at were the psychosocial factors, again, RANAS linked, so perception of risk, attitude towards household water treatment, norm, ability, and self-regulation. Perhaps some of these may clarify the queries that are coming up on the chat, but I would be happy to take them up after the presentation. And then we also looked at, inquired about various socioeconomic characteristics, because that contextualize various households that we targeted. And after we have collected these 300 and 400 odd sample points, interviewed those many households, essentially women, we can start doing wonderful stuff, statistical stuff that we like to do, really quantitative stuff. So we can start relating how socioeconomic or contextual factors may affect or influence psychosocial factors. And then we can map it out, and we can see that risk is influenced, is closely linked to, for example, wealth level, perception of risk, and how good information access is, what kind of faith do they have, whether they have any health problem, level of education of mothers. So these kind of mappings, then you can start doing to understand to what extent the contextual factors and social environmental conditions are influencing the psychosocial factors, more psychological factors. And there need not be these social environmental factors that we are that we survey need not be exhaustive lists. So we not always are able to let's say explain perception of risk to very high level of accuracy, but still it tells us that various subsets of social environmental factors influence various psychosocial factors, that contextual factors do matter, that they influence the way we see the world around us. But okay, what is more interesting is, based on this case study, we also just regressed to what extent psychosocial factors, the environmental psychology in context of RANAS influences behavior, which is of using household water treatment. And you would be surprised, this kind of shows, this kind of shows various factors that we were able to bring together based on 300 odd households reduced to 257 because because of data quality. Let's see, and what we can see here is that not all aspects, not all psychosocial aspects are influencing adoption of household water treatment. So here in case of Indonesia, what we found was attitudes, like how much do you enjoy the taste of boiling water, for example, as a very influencing factor on whether people are using boiling water as a household water treatment technology, or adopting household water treatment technology or not. Personal norm is very influential. We have always found that what people think is normal based on what others are doing, for example, has been found quite influential. And it's also important to see capacity, being able to execute technology is very important. So here comes really important, at least in this context, role of capacity building in one form or the other to sustain good wash practices, here household water treatment. So for example, here what we found was having confidence, faith in yourself in being able to perform a certain household water treatment was significant at significance level of 0.01. Having faith in yourself that you would be able to sustain the use of that technology is also significant. Barrier planning is another aspect which was significant. Again, self-regulation, being able to link to capacity. These were alongside norms, what people think about using household water treatment. In this case, were quite influential in influencing behavior. And we were able to explain almost 85% of the variance of people adopting or not adopting household water treatment. So this is one example of how strong, and we have seen it in other case studies as well, how let's say, influential this theory is, or let's say how powerful this framework is to interpret behavior with regards to household water treatment. Now, what we can do even more is using Bayesian belief network, and I'm pretty sure many of you are aware of that, to really display it for not just to analyze it statistically, not just to interpret data in a causal manner, but also to display it to stakeholders, policymakers, and play around with, oh, what if we increase, for example, education level more towards higher, more favorable socioeconomic condition? What does it mean? All the way via attitude to improvement percentage, people using, or probability of using household water treatment. And so this is just a regression. To simplify it, Bayesian belief network is nothing else but just a regression of sorts, which takes in the data and gives you various distributions that you see here. And the beauty of it is not only you're able to see let's say disentangle the data into various elements and see it visually, but also you can play with it by changing education, or you can even change various, you can change percentages of attitude from low to 8% to 0, and you can move high to all the way to 100% and see what effect it has on HWT. So essentially, this Bayesian belief network model that you have, which is essentially calibrated on existing data, can then be used to run scenarios. And effectively, where I'm getting at is to design policies by playing with this nice tool. And most effective policy, given the data evidence that you have, to influence maximum adoption of household water treatment possible. So what we found in a case study here is that, well, yeah, indeed, if you have wealthy, educated parents, it's easier. We find it's easier to, we find higher probability adoption. So educating parents, well, yeah, it's a long-term mission, but if you make them more aware, perhaps it influences. What we found also was indigenous belief, so which is more linked to norms, also influences, belief system influences whether you would adopt technology or not, household water technology or not. And also you can see in this case, we found that many respondents didn't know the risk of using untreated water. So awareness again plays an important role, and it keeps coming back to the nice framework that we had in the beginning, where awareness also plays an important role in behavioral change. Yeah, so that was household water treatment. As a behavior, let's say household water treatment behavior, or behavior towards using household water treatment. Now we can change the outcome variable from household water treatment use to water use in general, efficient water use, and we can similarly apply the framework going from contextual to psychosocial to different kinds of users and their behavior towards efficient use of water. So one example of water use, which we have also implemented in Vietnam, is willingness to conserve groundwater. As you can see, a particular district in Vietnam, a province in Vietnam, it has major challenges with salinity, and the red area that you see here, higher salinity, and green, green low salinity. So you can see here, it's because of the river. But okay, so what we can do is just like in the Indonesia case study, we can identify villages or household locations within villages based on random sampling for various districts within the province, which we did that. And we had 417 households sampled using the same methodology, same template, except that changing the questions to a new outcome question, which was willingness to conserve water. And then we can, as we also did in the household water treatment study, we can map it, the data that we have, disentangle it using Bayesian belief network. And you can see already here, we have different set of socioeconomic variables. So we had slightly changed questions that we asked, but essentially they are the same, except that you just change the outcome variable. And so here we also had biophysical variables such as level of salinity that was provided to us from the sampled salinity in various well locations. We also asked questions about wealth, age, etc. And what, again, based on this, what we found was that most influential socioeconomic characteristic was indeed awareness about salinity, saline water. Also employment, what kind of employment were you in? And in this particular instance, at the psychosocial level, what we found was norm was playing a major role in people not pumping too much groundwater and going for other sources, or willing to conserve groundwater because it was quite linked, very much linked to salinity. And so norm was very influential again, what you think, others think, for example, what is normal, what is not normal action. That was then followed by perception of risk in terms of water quality, being exposed to saline water, and then attitude. We can also use the Bayesian belief network to actually predict. So we can, various locations, households where we sampled, we can actually use the model to predict it. And for example, and we can visually display it as well. So we can really identify hotspots if we can. But what clearly this one shows is that willingness to conserve groundwater, the behavior of willingness to conserve groundwater has not one-to-one relationship with actual salinity. So it also shows that reality is one, but the way we perceive and all the psychosocial processes that come in between influence a lot the behavior that we end up with. Now, final case studies, water use efficiency. This is going on. This we did in Maharashtra, in eastern part of Maharashtra, 4 districts, and we sampled 345 households. And there, the outcome variable was adoption of irrigation practices, whether they're using drip, sprinkler, or flood irrigation. And again, we use the same questionnaire template. We just change the question for the outcome variable that we have in mind, irrigation, micro irrigation. And we were able to use this based on the household survey and interpret what influences adoption of irrigation technology and practices. What here we found, again, norms playing a key role, but also risk perception of water scarcity. And very interesting statement that we got out of this was, part of it may appear, let's say, obvious that a farmer who is highly educated would be willing to take up modern technology. But what we also found that not just that, but we also found it's a combination of characteristics. So highly educated, who is middle-aged, moderately wealthy, who actually receives not too much promotion, but low promotion, is the one who has the highest probability of adopting irrigation technology. So what it tells us is not just a way to design policies, but also who to target. So these are the kind of farmers who we could target, and they could become early adopters, may end up changing norms when other farmers sees more farmers adopting, for example, irrigation technology. Then because of it being more normal, others would start adopting. So this could also be used as a strategy to roll in interventions. Okay, so I'm done with the case studies, and this is This is the slide, because I promised in the beginning we're going to talk about a bit about women empowerment. This is my last slide again. My understanding of the AWESOME framework is that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, perhaps it could be a point of discussion, that there are various, let's say, behaviors, not just one, that contributes to women empowerment. And one in particular, since I am a water guy coming from a water faculty, would be water and sanitation practices, good water sanitation practices that perhaps make adoption of it makes women safe, and that dimension empowers them. So if we are talking about behaviors, that is one behavior which contributes. And there could be other behaviors that together really empowers. What I'm pitching for here is that RANAS could be a methodology that can help us interpret and disentangle one behavior at a time. I'm more interested in water and sanitation linked behavior, but others could also be investigated, and policies or interventions be designed and implemented that maximizes on adoption, or maximizes on positive behavior change, and leading to women empowerment. This is all I had to say about women empowerment. But okay, this is all I have. I think if you have questions, I'm happy to answer a few.
Thank you, Dr. Pande. I wanted to first ask Dr. Bhavani if she would like to chime in, and then I think we'll go into the questions in the chat.
Thank you, Kripa, and thank you so much, Dr. Saket. That was it was really fascinating to hear and to see the entire presentation and how you use the RANAS framework. It's also just so relevant to the work that we're doing, like I mentioned before. But again, when you presented again, I could see like a million, not just in terms of water and sanitation. There are so many PhD students right now that could use this RANAS methodology for doing at least the first level of understanding what things are before they even go on to designing whatever they are planning to design for their communities. Apart from this this conversation, I was hoping Ashwati would be a part of this conversation, and I don't see her online. But Reshma is online and Kripa is online, and Kripa, Reshma, and all those who have worked on the AWESOME framework. Do you see what I'm seeing about what an alignment there could be between RANA's framework and the AWESOME framework? It's like almost like one becomes a tool to feed into the other. This is what I see. I was hoping that this presentation would also be able to kind of create that interest in you to see how we could actually maybe use one to build on the other. This was one of the things but there is one question specifically. There's a question that I would like to ask you, Dr. Saket, and this is something that I was asking Sid also a couple of days earlier. This is generally, I mean, we have a behavior change that we are setting as a goal, and this behavior change we are saying, oh, this is good behavior because we believe this is good behavior because it's coming from a particular philosophy and it's coming from a particular agenda and knowledge system, which is typically Western knowledge system. That is okay. It is agreed by, let us say, even if we talk about the SDGs, let's say that all the nations, members of the nation states, have agreed for it. But even when you talk about the members of the nation states and agreeing on the SDGs, you're talking about the intellectual elite of that particular country, which means every single person who's actually signed on to that agreement has been educated by a Western ideology and a Western thought process. All of us are products of that same thing. You are, I am, even if you've studied in an IIT, which is an Indian institution, but we are products of a Western way of thinking. And I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong. I'm just putting it out there. So the goals have been set by that kind of thinking. So naturally, it's only natural that when there is education on that line of thinking, it actually makes that possible. It's actually almost like a no-brainer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the part of the challenge of sustainable development is not about getting the people who are educated into a Western way of education to buy into goals that have been set up by the Western. That's like an automatic link. But also part of the sustainable development is how do you understand better systems that are there, and then how do you capture that information, and somehow everything that we're doing seems to re-emphasize the same thing. Of course, our goals are set by the West, and of course, the methods to get there are Western. But there is a thing that we also say that there may be older and more sustainable ways that we're not looking at, and if these tools are going to only re-emphasize the Western thing, like you said, education is the one that matters. These are the results that go out.
Yeah.
How are we going to bring the other angle into it? That's something that I've been struggling with, and it's something that I was even recently talking to Sid. It's you can't. I don't know. There's some discrepancy over here that I'm not able to map my head to.
Mm-hmm. If we can also I mean indeed even the Rana's framework is developed by people in the West. But I do think mapping of psychology, let's say environmental psychology, and how it influences behavior, irrespective of the language that we use, there has to be some universality. And I mean, you can implement this without education, for example, as your question. You can just use psychological variables that we have, translated in local language. And so they interpret questions in the way of their interpretation, in the way of their view. And you can, I think, and what we have found is in having applied this in various non-Western countries, it's quite effective in interpreting, in disentangling behavior of interest in terms of various environmental psychological variables. I mean, it's not exhaustive, the list of environmental, the list of psychosocial variables, but yeah, I think it's reasonably powerful in interpreting what we have out there. And again, this is if we even forget about education. What we are also finding out is that local reality, for example, institutions play a very heavy role. If institution as something which controls culture, brings out more, let's say, universality of the method that we have presented here. Now, it may depend on the behavior, the change in behavior that we want. Perhaps that is subjective. What is good behavior? What is bad? That is a very valid question. But again, the methodology is almost independent of the behavior that you want to discuss. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know if it's answering the question, but what I'm, or the comment, responding to the comment, but what I think, I don't have an answer per se, but what I think is, what I believe is in universality of the model that we're using. At least there should be some level of universality in the way psychology works, because no matter whether we are in the East or the West, psychology works in the same way, human psychology. And if we have good methodologies to, to bring it out, I think global South or global North should not matter.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your wonderful talk. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we had several, I know you addressed some of the questions in the chat, Dr. Pande, but I wanted to pick up where you left off and see, where did we start? Dr. Sophia, did he answer your question about norm and ability?
No, I'm still wondering, just as an idea for implementation. I mean, I know your study is not about implementation, but I was just wondering, like you found in your research that norm plays a big role, isn't it? So I'm just wondering, how would you change norm? But I mean, you have to, I mean, one thing I understood is that by making more and more people adopt the behavior, but then how to make more and more people adopt the behavior.
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. So the analysis, let's say the methodology can help us identify potential early adopters. So the Bayesian belief network model that I described in various case studies, we could identify which kind of socioeconomic characteristics, or along with psychosocial characteristics, let's say, are most favorable. And you can play with those. So you can use the graph, the Bayesian belief network model, as a tool and identify which type of characteristics lead to highest adoption. For example, yeah, I mean, let's not, I would avoid the type highly educated types, but let's say people who are more aware, living in flatter areas, and involved in agriculture, looks like are the ones who are most likely to adopt. We can assess something like this, adopt household water treatment, for example. We can come up with such type of conclusion, because that's what data is telling us, and could use as a start and identify those kind of households with those characteristics and approach them with intervention, hoping that they'll adopt it. Of course, they may still not adopt it, but those kinds are best chance. And if we're able to have them adopt it or change their behavior, then there are, yeah, more people with the desired behavior that may perhaps change the norm. But education, again, it comes back to education. Perhaps awareness, it can also influence norm. It's not, I think there are two other types of norms where favorable socioeconomic characteristics can influence positively as well. And that is, yeah, it also depends on the location. It's not always that norm is the most explanatory one, most influential one, but often we have find it to be. There are other pathways as well. For example, perception of risk and ability, they also play a good role, quite important role. I mean, self-regulation as well. So those can be influenced more easily than norm. And by increasing adoption, then we can also influence norm.
Okay, thank you. And I was just wondering, did you actually find those 5 factors, ranas, when you did factor analysis? Like,
yeah.
you do?
Yeah, something like
did.
that. Yeah, so we did principal component analysis to find the dominant axis of variation, because we had multiple questions for norm, we had multiple questions for each of the R, or for each of the psychosocial factors. And then we ultimately come up with one for each. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
There have been several comments from Sid and Soor. If you guys want to pipe in or pipe up and just go for it, go ahead.
Sid, are you taking it?
Yeah, why don't you speak first? Sure.
Okay. Thanks so much for a really interesting It's, for us in Israel, it's like something that we don't think about so much, and it's really, really interesting work, and the contribution to the welfare of millions of people is admirable. So having said that, so I had a couple of comments throughout your presentation, and being coming from the side of interested in what education can do in whatever shape and form. I'm kind of puzzled a little bit in the sense of how education is, how important is it really to change those certain aspects of human behavior. I mean, obviously education can get us a long way in many fields. You're not going to be an engineer if you haven't been educated. But I'm kind of having a problem convincing myself that we had this problem in a similar problem in Israel, where people would collect flowers that are very rare, and there was just no way of, I mean, everybody knew they were rare, but they're very beautiful, and they would just pick them up, and they grow, you know, wild. And the way they tackled that was kind of education, but through the children. And that was like a very interesting experiment. It worked very well as with seat belts in cars. Mm-hmm. It's a change of behavior. With like agents that are not, how would I say, already kind of their norms and their behavior is so strongly a part of their life that you would just not get them to do another thing, but it seems that their kids are able to influence that. So I'm wondering about whether knowledge is the issue here. Am I missing something that I should be investigating more, or is it really not knowledge? It's like, you know, self-experience with bad diarrhea or other diseases, or whatever of that nature that influence older people. Let me just put video for a second so that you see who you're speaking to. Hi.
Hi.
So I was wondering about that, because the belief network seems like it's trying to put inside some kind of a robot that we assume that if he, you know, we tune that part and tune that part, at the end we'll get that behavior. And I think it's a little bit too simplistic for older people that live in a community that does whatever for hundreds of years. And, you know, diarrhea is part of life. It's great. I don't know. So what's your thought about the part of education within that, you know, frame?
So the way Ranas sees behavior or outcome of certain behavior as it being influenced by certain set of psychosocial, or let's say behavioral factors, and those are, as I showed in one of the tables, very influential, and we have seen it to be very influential in predicting the outcome, in predicting, let's say, behavior of interest.
Yes, but Prediction and causality are very different things.
Sure. And so the prediction is based on a model which is based on an causal assumptions made by Rana's framework. So we rely on theory, Rana's environmental psychology theory, which is embedded in Rana's as the reason to believe that such causality exists. So we may be wrong, but we are not saying that we have witnessed it. It's that we have made assumptions relying on this theory, which is accumulation of knowledge of many other psychologists and loads of work that has been done in the past. That has ultimately come up with axioms or whatever you may like. This is how it happens. This is how. This is the hypothesis or whatever hypothesized causality.
So what you described is not like we have in Hebrew a saying called Kunstpatent. It's not like a trick on how to get faster to the result. This is like the basic framework that you believe is influential over people's behavior.
Yeah.
That is it has the problem. It's the framework for every problem.
Well, I mean, that's the thing that is where the idea of universality. So it comes with your own individual belief as a researcher. It's reflexive in that sense. That there is some, let's say, not truth, but there's some universality in it. That the way it implements the relationship between psychology and outcome, or psychology and behavior, is similar irrespective of the outcome, similar irrespective of the context of behavior that you're talking about, the type of behavior that you're talking about. So it's a reinterpretation of psychological, psychosocial factors in terms of not picking up rare flowers, for example. And then you reinterpret, what do we mean by norm in this arena of behavior? So if I can quickly come back to your original question and try to respond to that. So these psychological, they are 5 and quite powerful across different types of studies that we've done. And it's not just norms. There's also perception of risk. Very important one is also attitude. And that's where your sensitivity to how kids feel about it, or how you feel about this behavior comes in. And there's also 2 other types, which are ability and self-regulation. And these 2 are linked to capacity. So now how does education, or how may education come in? Education can come in terms of being able to get to the capacity of enabling certain technology. That's where education can play a role. So for example, if you're talking about adoption of technology, which is at a certain level of sophistication, it may, for example, may need some reading or being more comfortable with observing some things. That's where education comes in, not because you're educated to see things like that, but that these things are seen as normal, normal in normal sense. That if I look at the meter is moving like that, that is the reason why we should look, because it does something. That's the direct role of education, but awareness plays a very important role as well, that could influence not capacity to do certain things, or being able to sustain performance of certain things over time, but also it can come in to influence your perception of risk. And that plays also a critical role. Norms is the most difficult one. I think that can be influenced indirectly by education. But I mean, that perhaps we should, I mean, I can't definitely say that education and norms.
That's a rabbit hole.
Yeah. So I mean, there are many psychological factors that play a role, and depending on the case study, it may depend from study to study. Different factors may be playing different roles, and so design of interventions could be different from place to place, depending on how the theory is interpreting the way psychology is working out there.
Thanks so much. Very, very
Thank you.
extensive. Thanks.
Sid, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I do. So, Saket, thank you very much. And
Just a quick follow-up, really small. How long was that tested after whatever intervention was done when in the belief network? Like the test of whether people changed their behavior. Was it like a week after, a month after, 2 months after?
That is what we haven't done that yet. What we have done, that is something we would like to do. And
that connects to another lecture that we had a week or 2 weeks back, and wondering whether education sticks.
Yeah. I mean, that would be something interesting. We have been trying to do that, but COVID spoiled that. We couldn't go in the field to do post-intervention. And generally it is like 1 year later, 6 months after intervention. So we do pre-intervention survey, then intervention and post-intervention survey, and then see how things are changed.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Thanks.
okay, so I'd like to again thank you for a really interesting talk. And people asked questions that I wanted to ask, and in the discussion, things came out. So I'd like to make a little summary of what I heard. And it's aimed to whoever wants to hear it, but aimed in particular to students. So when there are arguments about universality or claims for universality, a huge amount is implicated in that. And at least in the West, there's a tradition of 2,400 years of discussions about that. Plato and Aristotle started the conversation, and in some ways, it's changed in terms of what we know about the issues, but the issues are still there. They have not been solved. So here's a guess that the framework that you presented, the categories, the major categories, attitude, risk, and others, that those are, the claim you're making is that those are common to all societies. They're universal. As you get into lower resolutions or higher resolutions, I never know which one, but now you're going into details, then the universality basically goes away because, as you said, from one village to the other, there might be different weightings for different aspects and then different relations between the different aspects. But the aspects are the framework, and the framework is common in the East and the West, and that's where you're looking, that's what you're trying to find, is the universality. How things play out within the universal categories that you're talking about, well, that depends on, it's an empirical question, and that just depends on the particular place where you're doing the testing. So for the students, I want to tell you that this is a big debate in the social sciences. People who can show universality, they're the ones who get prizes. They get funding for research. In certain fields, they get Nobel Prizes. The universality is the ring on the merry-go-round or whatever the carousel that you try to get. The specifics are considered to be contextual. And contextual in the social sciences, some of the social sciences, is thought of as the enemy. You don't want to have a model describing what happens in a particular village in a particular year, etc. Because all you're describing then is what's happening in that particular place, but it'll never help you to figure out what's happening in another place at the same time, or the same place at a different time. That's not the case for anthropology. And anthropologists look for differences rather than the commonalities. They look at what separates people, not what unites them. In the sciences, in physics, for instance, something that goes beyond, or something that is not the expectation based on a law that's been devised is considered noise. And noise you try to get rid of as best as you can. So there's a temptation in the social sciences to find the universal, which give you the categories to think about what you're looking at, but it doesn't tell you how it's going to work out in the particulars. That's where the noise is, that's where the context is. So there's always a tension between the two. So I think you're trying to work out both of them. I don't know if you'd ever would say that, what I'm saying now, but you have this general framework which has claims about universality, and yet it also has the specifics and the contextual that within the general, it works in a particular way for this particular village at a particular time. So I think that's admirable. And the last thing, it's a question, not a comment, the way that I try to summarize a few things that people have said. Is there, although you say this is the case for East and West, and that people are people, and they get born wherever they get born. They have no choice in it, and then they grow up in a particular place, and their understandings of the world are a particular understanding, but there's something common to all of us, that we have attitudes, we have all the things that you have mentioned, these categories. Could you imagine a society that has other components? It is a hard question. That has other components that are not in what you have in the Rana system. In other words, can you think outside of the conceptual framework that you have to include other points? Mm-hmm. An analogy, and with this I'll end. In some people in the cognitive sciences who deal with language believe that there's a universal grammar, and everybody is born with the universal grammar. They're exposed to a specific language. The universal grammar is high-level abstract. The specific language that people speak are more low-level, but they're consistent with the universal grammar. And so there you find something which is general, the universal grammar, universal, and then you have the specifics, how that gets played out as different languages were developed and changed over time. So about the question I asked, and I know I'm talking too much, I'll just ask it this way. Could it be the case that because you made the categories that you made, that you're going to get people responding in terms of the categories that you devised? And is there a way of thinking outside of the box for other categories that could be categories that are universal, but that you have to look for them outside of Western culture.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry for being too long-winded.
I think this is a really interesting question. Thank you. So I do agree. I mean, your interpretation is absolutely aligned with mine. And I totally agree with your interpretation of what I presented. It's a difficult problem it's a unknown problem, type of problem. We are looking for something that we don't know, and we probably don't even know what it looks like. So it's challenged by not knowing the universal set. So if Ranas belongs to some way, some part of this universal set, we need to know the universal set. We need to know all the things that we have not included are out there, so that we can test in a way. Oh yeah, this is what we are missing, and perhaps let's see whether it works better now. Without knowing the universal set, it would be a difficult question, but then I think it's more how body of knowledge evolves over time. We get exposed to things that we beforehand didn't know even existed. What we have done, we actually are working on a study, a paper, where we have household water treatment survey from 9 or 10 countries in different parts of the world, global south, but in Africa, South America, Asia. And we implemented RANAS, as you said, that at high level, the psychology, we believed it worked the same way, but indeed the strengths are different in different countries when the context, the behavior remains the same, household water treatment. And so we started looking for an additional variable that would make the strength of relationships between psychological and outcome the same across different countries. And it's interestingly linked to, for all the social scientists out there, linked to the problem of endogeneity, because often use of household water treatment also influences norms. So there is a bidirectional, independent, what we think are independent variables like norms are actually endogenous, that they're linked to household water treatment. And so you cannot treat, but anyway, so what we found was that institutional quality, which we got from World Governance Indicators of the World Bank, tend to be the kind of additional variable. Well, you can call it instrument variable, but the kind of variable that allows us to have almost similar kind of, let's say, relationship between psychological and outcome household water treatment. So that is one more empirical way of let's say, moving towards universality, so to say, at least in terms of something that is similar across different countries, that it makes some sense as we move across places. On the type of variables being used that are not in the list right now, based on additional studies that we are doing, we find that trust is not there as a variable, but it appears to be one additional variable which RANAS misses that we are trying to bring in. We don't know. Now again, it's exploring where the universal set is, if at all it exists, but all of a sudden we come across this new variable, trust. It's not exactly represented by RANAS. So let's plug it and play. And we are working on that right now. So new interviews that we hope to do this year and early next year in Colombia, we'll see how influential this additional variable would be. So there are two things. Is there something that beyond psychology being similar but works in different manner in different places? Is there something extra that could explain this variance in place? we find institution as one of those variables. And in the set of ranas, we think trust could be another additional variable, but we'll see how significant that is as being able to explain additionally the variance in water use efficiency in this case.
Okay, thank you. I have just a comment, and that's it. A way to try to answer the question that I was asking is to see how you could refute the framework that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is it refutable? Is there a way of doing things, your studies, where the framework will not be there? Freud had a similar kind of a problem, for instance. Mm-hmm. It was irrefutable. Everything could be explained by it, and then in some ways, nothing could be explained by it. So maybe a way to get into it is to figure out how to refute what it is that you're doing. I'm not saying you should do it. I'm just saying it's just as a way to think about it. That might be an avenue. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Shiva Prasad, did you want to, can you, I don't understand your question, so you're going to have to ask it.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Saket, this is Shiva Prasad. I'm also working on pro-environmental behavior. So I found this value belief norm theory very interesting, and I read about it. So just curious to know, have you applied this particular theory in any of your studies, particularly conducted in Asia? So also, if VBN and Ranas is somehow related, is it somehow related? Would like to know more about it.
I think we believe, and this is Diana, one of my students who is working on it. We think, based on her literature review, that VBN is embedded in Ranas. So Ranas is a very rich theory. What we are realizing is that it's absorbing various other theories and putting it all together. So yeah, we have not explicitly used in empirical manner VBN theory, but we have used it in publications to discuss about certain things, how beliefs may evolve over time, but those are more conceptual. And again, yeah, we are more inclined towards water-related behavior, so we have used it in that context.
I know Reshma had a quick question.
Yeah, Dr. Saket, this is Reshma. We have met before also. Yeah. So I just have a few questions. One question is like, when you say household water treatment, it's not just boiling, right? Yeah. So according to context, you'll have different process or like procedure. For example, in Kerala, you boil it along with, you add a few materials in it, probably a Ayurvedic powder or something. So how, so will you only focus, or are like our questions on norms, like ability and all, will only be focused on just boiling, or?
No, it would be.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
that's it.
Yeah,
like,
you can make.
Yeah. Oh, I'll finish. Sorry. Based on the context, the process is also changed. So how do we, incorporate those also to the existing, probably a standardized questionnaire of runners? That's my question.
Yeah. So it's a resolution related question. In our studies, we have used like it's 0 or 1. It's a binary. Binomial. So either you use household water treatment technology, whatever it is, boiling water, UV disinfection, depending on location that we are in, or not. So we aggregate it to answer it, because that's where it comes back to the sense of universality, that it's easier to deal when it's simpler. The resolution is at that scale, 0 or 1.
Yeah. I mean, that is where I think, you know, we find it difficult also, because when we bring in standardized questionnaire and we experience something really different from what the questions are. So that's like, how do we incorporate those factors also to the system? So yeah.
So the questions, I mean, can be adapted. By standardized question, I meant they should be talking about something similar. I mean, you can adapt it. So you can ask your questions related to whatever household water treatment they are using. So you can ask, for example, using some Ayurvedic additives. You can phrase a question in norm: how normal do you feel to use Ayurvedic additives to treat your water? So you can adapt that, but essentially you're asking the same mapping in terms of how normal an individual feels using a certain technology that is available to him. Household water technology accessible to him, which we consider as household water treatment technology. And it is at that level that we discuss. So you can adapt the question to the kind of treatment technology, but still when we assess it, we assess it at, okay, let's ignore about Ayurvedic additives, but let's just call it household water treatment. And then we can do it across villages or across locations.
One more to add, it's just like doers and non-doers, like that, or just
yeah, so essentially it's doers and not doers. Yeah, adopters and non-adopters. Yeah.
But what if where there is a case of partially adopters?
And do you have an example? How would you see a partial adopter?
Like you sometimes wash your hands.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, you can also have, you need not be limited to 2 classes in the outcome. You can also have 3 classes. So for example, yeah, you can have 3, or you can have multiple, in fact. So you can have, I wash my hands once a week, I wash my hands 3 times a week, I wash my hand every day, I don't wash my hands. You can even have that.
Thank you so much.
I think, Namaste, this is Sophia again. I think maybe, Reshma, do you mean, what if people, they don't use efficient water treatment, like they just let it settle and take away, I mean, to make it less turbid, but it doesn't actually mean that the water is safe to drink. Is that what you mean, Reshma, with partial treatment?
Yeah, yeah, that's what I mean. Sometimes they do all their processes and procedures, but sometimes there are, even though they know, they have the awareness that they have to use or probably boil the water before drink, they do not practice it. So where do I classify? That's what that was my question. Yeah.
I think if the outcome variable remains the same in your study area, you can have yeah, you can have various classes. So you can have, as I said, and so the idea is the causality, the way we see it, it's coming from, let's say, perception of risk of water quality, and therefore you use a technology which is very efficient, not so efficient, and don't use technology at all. And we try to look how perception of risk leads to the outcome of whatever efficiency you end up using. Maybe it doesn't link at all, and that is something that is revealed as we
maybe risk is not just a hypothesis. It might be another factor. Maybe risk is not even in the vocabulary of some cultures. It just doesn't exist. We feel risk is something that is, you know, everybody feels what risk is or understands that. That might not be the case.
Can be. So I think, I mean, I can only speak based on the experience of service, limited service that we have done. But I think it also depends on you know, I don't think it's just asking straight away, or do you perceive risk, but I believe it's also art of asking question, and also not letting them see that you're asking this specifically, that kind of question. So it's also, questions could be asked in such a manner that reduces the bias of affirmative bias, you know, to respond, to give you a response that you're looking for. One has to be also careful with that. But I believe there are ways. I'm not a specialist in that. There are others who are. But yeah, valid question. That your question may be misinterpreted. Perhaps that is the reason why people tend to ask multiple questions around risk.
Right.
And that's why
that was actually connected to what Sid suggested, that there might be factors that we as Western cultures, we just don't have the vocabulary for, and they're very important to other cultures that, you know, we never know.
Can be.
I am extremely sorry to do this, but we actually have to wrap up. I know several people have to move on to further meetings this afternoon, where we are in India. I know you're not all in the afternoon, but Dr. Saket, a lot of people have been commenting, and I was wondering if you would be willing to share your contact info for them to get in touch with you.
Okay, I can send my email.
I have your email address. If you don't mind me sharing it, I can send it out.
No, please do.
Okay, but I wanted to just say again, thank you so much. This has been really fascinating. I'm definitely going to be getting in touch with you. I worked on the Awesome framework a lot, so I'm really interested to see how they can work together. I think there's a lot of potential in terms of looking at behavior change factors. So I'm really interested.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will, I'll also send you a transcript of the chat after it's all done, downloaded and everything.
Thank you. And thanks again for the wonderful opportunity to give this talk and have this really interesting in-depth discussion that I've never had before. And I do really sincerely hope that we are able to find a common ground to work together on the exciting work that you're engaged in.
Yeah.
Really
Thank you, Saket. Thank you for taking the time. Really, it was really good having you. And your talk will go up online soon, and then we'll send you a link of the talk once that's done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bhavani. Thank you, sir.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Talk to you later. Thanks again, Bhavani. Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.